Now first, my disclaimer. My crystal ball cracked several weeks ago and I have not gotten it repaired. So what I'm going to tell you is what I think is going on and what some of the implications may be for animal agriculture in terms of antimicrobials. And the bottom line is that we will have restrictions on the way that you handle antibiotics over your professional lifetime in this industry. You will see restrictions, and already have seen restrictions, on limitations for labeled use, products that were available or classes of products that were available that have had those restrictions placed. We'll talk about those. There is a voluntary program today, and there is a discussion in Congress about prescription control over all OTC drugs, over-the-counter drugs, the things you buy at Farm and Fleet, etc. That pressure will continue. There are constrictions of extra-label use. The cephalosporins is one example of that where it directly occurred in April, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes and the implications. And there are indirect effects because when you look at the extra label use policy, veterinarians are required to set a withdrawal time, a extended withdrawal time. That means that you go to the pharmacologic books and you try to figure that out and you set a time, but you are responsible as the veterinarian. We're going to talk here in a few minutes about residue testing, and that may heighten the game significantly in terms of the risks to the profession with extra label use, and certainly then the problems associated with its use in production. And we'll talk about the residues. One thing I find this to be a confusion, and it's really quite simple. There are two legal uses of drugs in the United States. One is if you follow the label explicitly, and that includes species, dose, duration, and all of the pieces, withdrawal time, that go with that use. And then there's this other category over here of extra label use. That is under veterinary script. It requires the veterinarian to be involved in the operation. It requires the producer to accept what the veterinarian tells them to do. And the veterinarian has to be available and some of the other things, 4 things that go with extra label. But that is a large but not necessarily complete armamentarium of available use. There's one other, and that's illegal acts. People that fall outside of this circle or this circle with the compounds, even though they legally obtained them, are violating the law. You might want to think about that and the implications of that in terms of how you use medications on farm, and I'll explain to you in a few minutes why I think that may be important. Cephalosporin is a limitation that was put up April of this past year, and it eliminated all of the uses except those that are on the label. And cephalosporins being Axel, Exceed, etc. Those products now have to be used according to the label. What that effectively did was it took out all of the cephalosporins that were being used from human sources. It took away all that extra label capabilities that veterinarians had, lifted that out of the pocket and said that's no longer acceptable. That has an implication on your business and on the availability of product. The exceptions would be to treat a disease that is not on the label but under label conditions. So if you find a new bug and you find that the products are successful, a veterinarian can help you use it in that manner. It's an extra label use, but it is allowable to the veterinarian under these conditions of the cephalosporin limitations. So that's an area that has come to effect. Now I want to talk about the more global picture in terms of what's going on. This is the poster child for the activities currently going on in Europe and the consumer demands here in the United States. Avaparsin is a product that, by the way, was never approved in the United States, has never been used legally or otherwise in the United States as far as we know. It was banned in Denmark in '96, basically banned by all of the EU and by '98. And what you see is in pigs a drop down to a level that is not zero when that product was withdrawn. Why is that important? Well, it indicates to me that that resistance stays in the population and can be raised again by other things. If you look at the pork, it was never in pork to any extent in terms of the bacteria that were carrying this resistance. Never showed up in pork, so the fact that it dropped out in the pigs or dropped largely out in the pigs really had no effect. The interesting thing was this was done to protect humans. They began in 2002 to measure humans, and that's this little green line. For some reason it went up in 2004-05 and then went back down. We've now seen a slight rise in the resistance to ephesium in pigs as well. Now the other side of the story is it's never used in the United States. We have a reasonably high level of VREs, vancomycin resistant enterococci, that would be similar to this, but we've never had the product. So there's got to be other uses, and I think largely they are human uses. Since we haven't had any veterinary uses, we can't blame the veterinarians on that one. That is an issue where essentially what you're seeing is the desire to reduce totally the amount of drug being used with the idea that it'll spill over into the human side, and that really does not seem to be particularly active. Guidance 209 is now official. It used to be a proposal. What it does is it lays out public health concerns for the population. It says what FDA is interested in. It summarizes key facts, and for those of you that want to read it, actually go to the FDA site and pull up Guidance 209 and look at the text of the materials, and you'll see largely the discussion of the preventative, precautionary principles found in the European work reflected in those works. It does outline what they consider to be judicious use in food animals. What a guidance is FDA talking to the public and saying this is what we think you should do. It is not a legally binding document. It more raises discussion, and certainly it has. It defines what are medically important drugs. Those are drugs that are important to therapeutics in humans, and if you go to their Guidance 152, you can find those. It's most of the it's tetracycline, cephalosporins, fluoroquinolones, most of the animal use treatment document or drugs would end up in that document. They say judicious use. And here it's actually important, the words they use: treatment, control, prevention of animal disease. That's different. We'll talk about Louise Slaughter's PAMTA bill, which I'm sure will be reintroduced again this year in the new Congress. But she's saying we only are going to allow in humans or in animals treatment, not control and prevention. So we've got some differences there. Injudicious use is all other use other than control, prevention, and treatment. So what that means is what people call subtherapeutics disappear under the category of injudicious. Now it's interesting, FDA, if they were to find that this caused a risk of public health, would by law be required to remove the drugs. They've chosen to use injudicious and judicious, and so therefore they can put these guidelines out and say, this is what we think we want you to do. So along comes Guidance 209. And it says the medically important drugs should be used to assure public health, to be used under veterinary oversight. So that really talks about moving the drugs, that first point, moving drugs from over-the-counter or in feed business, from direct feed into VFDs for feed and script for water specifically, but they do in their talk about injectables. So it looks to me like they will eventually try to do all of this in one fell swoop. They say this is something that they want to do over 3 years, and they give factors for approvals for preventive use. And you can read those: evidence of drug effectiveness, consistency with accepted veterinary practice, linked to a specific etiologic agent. This is the one that really creates problems for the drug manufacturers, because believe it or not, and maybe you do believe, we've got syndromes out there that are not associated with a specific etiologic agent. And therefore, under this guideline, prevention would not be, they would not be able to get approved for prevention. So it's use is appropriately targeted. In other words, it's not just a shotgun. And there are no reasonable alternatives, i.e. approved products already. Guidance 213 is voluntary. It says 3 years. The reason it's voluntary is because unless FDA CVM is ready to declare that a drug use is a potential risk for human public health, they really lack the power of anything other than coercion. I don't know what they can do with the companies. I'm not involved in that, but they have to get the companies to agree to change the OTC status of their products in feed and water. If they want new claims, it lays out the things that they need to do. It needs to be directed at a specific disease. They're going to have to follow the Guidance 152, which really says we're not going to, when you boil it all down, what it says is short-term treatment, high levels, not prolonged treatments are going to be more likely to be approved. So that says that as this goes, the labels will reflect that. I would expect that will have an impact on drug usage. The bottom line is, from my standpoint, the companies have got a big enough burden on this that they will not have new dosages and new indications unless they've got really a solid case to make, and they can do it inexpensively. So you've got what you've got. It's likely to move to RX status, or it's going to be a feed directive, veterinary feed directive, which in both cases is going to require veterinary oversight, veterinary involvement with that operation. They did not with the VFDs. They're currently rewriting that one. And it used to say it had to have a veterinary client-patient relationship. They've removed that, and now they talk about it being a licensed veterinarian in the course of their clinical practice. That's the same language that you find with scripts currently, so it gives a little wiggle room, but not a great deal. The other things you need to look at is 152, and I've broadly given you that guidance in terms of short-term, high dose, very little in terms of long-term usage. The manufacturers have to meet that and deal with that. And then PAMTA. It's got to be reintroduced, but I'm sure Louise Slaughter won again this year, so she'll be back. She's been back the last 4 Congresses. I can't imagine she won't be back for one more time. Where it goes, who knows? But it would severely restrict because it talks about ruling out all the non-therapeutic uses, and that includes control and prevention, in addition to what's referred to as subtherapeutic. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about that's sort of the environment that we've got here in the United States. Now let's talk about antibiotic resistance, which is in fact the driving force behind all of this activity worldwide. This is not a new problem. For those of us that have been following it, it's been around for a long time. The UK had a commission of folks, including some agricultural people, in 1969 and said that drugs should be restricted in food animals because of resistance. That was the first opportunity. There was a FDA proposed ban on subtherapeutic uses of penicillin and tetracycline in 1977 in the U.S. Your congressional folks put a stop to that. They simply said to the FDA, go ahead and do it. We'll just cut off your money. And the folks at FDA said, well, maybe we'll reconsider. And they've left that ban in place. The significance of that is that last year a group brought that up in a court in New York. We'll see how all of this goes. But it still continues to hang over the industry. Sweden banned growth promotants in 1986. Avoparcin was banned in 95 to 97. We've already looked at the effects of that in Denmark. Denmark voluntarily removed growth promotants. Voluntary in Denmark in the pig industry is considerably different than voluntary here. 98+% of their pigs go through the same co-ops, and when the co-op says this is a condition of sale, that voluntary is, well, it's still voluntary, but you'll have to eat an awful lot of pigs. So that occurred. They managed to convince the EU to do the same thing. So in 2005, the EU banned growth promotants. In 2010, the Danes banned the use of cephalosporins in pigs, food animals. Interesting, I talked to one of my friends in Denmark. He says, we don't use cephalosporins, and he said it was no big deal. I'm thinking over here that may not be the case. That would be considerably more of a deal. And so, but they did it. And they sort of are now driving the bus for other people. They weren't satisfied, and I'll show you why in a minute, with the results they were getting. So in 2010, they instituted a yellow card. They're soccer fans. So yellow card to them means you've done something wrong. You've committed a foul. And they set that system up. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I think it's important. This is a Dan map, which Dan map, if you're interested in this topic and you want to follow the Danish experience, and actually the Danes are, I'll give them credit, they really have a laboratory in human and animal usage for resistance and other things. They are much more organized than anybody else in the world. And so they actually can measure the impacts when they do something in the area of antimicrobials and public health. And they report it annually in their DAN map, so you can go in and look at that. But here's the usage of drugs up through 97. And you can see this is the growth promotants. This light blue is treatment. In other words, everything other than growth promotant. The growth promotant ban went in effect in 2000. And you see no growth promotants now. But you do see a steady rise in treatment. This is the human data, and you can see year by year the human data doesn't change very much. So any impact on antimicrobial resistance theoretically should come from the animals. You'll hear people say that Denmark has increased their production by 50%. They were about 22 million here. They're not quite 30 million there. Most all of that has gone in export. So they're finishing pigs of that increase is true, but it doesn't have the same impact as growing like we would raising the number of pigs from 100 million to 110 million. We actually raised 10 more million pigs fair to finish in the country. So you got to kind of take some of this with a grain of salt as you look at the usage. But nonetheless, that is. Now, they became really quite concerned about this trend, and I believe it was effectively occurred because veterinarians and producers had sick animals and they needed to treat them. And so that continued up. So about 2010, they said, this stuff's got to stop. And so they instituted their yellow card system. Now, the reason they can do that, I put this up here because this shows you the level of regimentation that exists in Denmark that does not exist here. All the pharmacies and all products have to be bought through the pharmacies. Veterinarians write the scripts every 30 days or 35 days. The pharmacy fills them. Each one of them reports the use. Feed mills report all the medicated feeds they produce, and they have to report who they go to. The veterinarians have to report who they go to, what the product was, what the amount used was, the animal species, the diagnosis. So you can see that they have a huge database of information that they can draw from and regulate from that we would not have. So the issue is the yellow card. If you're outside of a set limit in your operation, whether it's pigs or cattle or sheep or poultry, if you're outside that parameter, then you're going to get a yellow card. Now, two things happen when you get a yellow card. One, you get increased regulatory scrutiny. The other one is that your name is publicized in the local newspaper. One of my friends, his husband's a dairy veterinarian, he said he fired 2 clients after his mother called him and said, why in the hell did I see your name in the newspaper for misuse of drugs? That's a powerful phone call. And I'm sure it wasn't the only one that happened. So, you don't really want a yellow card. If you go for 9 months and have not improved your status, i.e. reduced your drug use, then you get increased scrutiny. You get a second veterinarian to come in and give an opinion as to how your drugs are being used or what you can do to reduce your usage. And then, if you don't get it done in 5 months, then you get a red card. The red card simply says the government can come in and reduce the number of animals on your farm until you get down to where your drug usage per animal is appropriate. So the idea behind all of that, I won't belabor it, but the idea is that under the yellow card, the veterinarian limits the prescriptions. You're limited in what drugs you can keep on the farm, so that means you got to go get a new script every time you're going to use it. You get unannounced visits, and the goal for any thinking person is to stay below the threshold. They're centralized. This is the Dutch now. The Dutch are in the game next. In 2011, they developed a centralized database after they saw what the Danes did. Theirs, however, is much more market-oriented. Their goal was a 20 to 50% reduction in antimicrobial use from the year 2009. They currently have a 32% reduction in 2011. They're on their way to 2015. I think they'll easily meet their 20 to 50% over that time period. 20% by 2011. They're already at 32%. They did that through appealing to the national pride of the producers, and they minimized fluoroquinolones and cephalosporins in animals. What you find is that when they do this, they reduce significantly the control and prevention of disease. They limit, you pretty much limit to treatment. Next. And so there, what you see, they started in 07, and they're dropping it down, and they're being successful in doing that. And you can look at that chart and figure out that that the tetracyclines are taking an awful lot of the hit. So that tells you that they're restricting. And this is over and above. They've already eliminated subtherapeutics. So this is all treatment, control, and prevention stuff that they're reducing. This is for the Netherlands in blue, France in red, Denmark in green, Finland in purple, and Norway in light or turquoise. And you can see the differences between the countries and what they use in their patterns. And I will predict to you that those numbers will continue to go down. Here is a comparison of the Netherlands. And what I want you to do is recognize that this chart goes from 0 to 200 milligrams for production unit. This chart goes from 0 to 100, or 110. So this is essentially half. So it would slide in under here for these countries. And so they're comparing with the Netherlands, France, Czech, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, which is all pent up about drug control, and Denmark down here. So there's a clear difference between those, and some of the people will want to know why that is, and I think they'll attempt to get down. Germany just started in 2012 a central reporting system. I think you can expect them to go the same way. To some extent, very few of them will get to the level the Danes have gotten to. Danes have been working at this for almost 10 years now. European Medicine Authority is looking to establish across the EU some sort of uniformity of reporting. So they essentially then would pull the EU 27 into this general pattern. So you've got that to work on. it won't be anywhere close to what VetStat is, which is that slide I showed you with all of the drugs being controlled or being identified as to who's using them. But it will have some impact. And as those issues get aired in Europe, you can be guaranteed that some people in the United States are going to be watching that and seeing how it goes. Interestingly, I've got a fellow that works in Holland. I asked him, and they have a habit in Holland of all the deads being rendered and the weights and the dates that they're picked up. They have to be picked up by central authorities. And my thesis and his is, as you reduce drug usage at the treatment level, you're going to increase deads, and they're going to increase in weights in terms of deads. He asked to get a hold of the summary for the rendering for the country and was told it was not available. Okay. I suspect, well, let's just say if it was good, it would have been available, in my cynical view. Okay. So, there has been an asking for increased drug reporting. In 2008, the animal drug user fee amendments required the pharmacologic companies in the United States to report total usage. Okay, it really doesn't mean anything. But it's the first step. FDA now is trying to find ways to make the data more meaningful, and they will, over time, move to some sort of a more organized reporting system. Representative Waxman asked for more detail in food animals by requiring feed mills to report use in feeds. That smacks a little bit of VetStat. Whether he'll get that through or not, seems like they've got bigger fish to fry today. Anyway, the next leg of this, that's the sort of the drug usage side in terms of approvals and restrictions in that area. The other side that I think you should be aware of is that FSIS has a new initiative on residue prevention. It will increase testing across all species. They're going to be able to do multiple analysis using fairly sophisticated equipment. They're going to be able to analyze 52, the number changes depending on who you talk to, but about 52 plus compounds in a single sample. Back 3 years, one sample was taken, one test was run, you did it on antibiotics, or you did it on carbadox, or you did it on a specific chemical, and so you got one test. Now you're going to do upwards of 50. That says that the number of results are going to go up by 50 times. When that happens, things are going to happen. I guarantee it. I don't know what they are yet, but I guarantee you, we're going to find things we didn't know were under the rock when they turn this puppy over. There's also lower detection levels in those tests than what were historic, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And the interesting thing is that processors are held to the standard that says that they're, but so far, the processors have been largely able to say that their producers are controlling antimicrobial residues, and so it's not a hazard, so it doesn't have to show up in their HACCP program, other than to say it's not a hazard. As they get more positive tests with a packer, now it becomes a hazard. Now they have to do something in their HACCP plan. Ladies and gentlemen, that redounds to only one group of people, and that's you. Okay? Violations will be done by FDA. That redounds to only one group of people, you. So that is a change in the game. In 2010, they were looking for antimicrobials, arsenic, beta agonists, reed, clenbuterol, the Chinese growth promotant, and then a variety of other compounds. Now they're going to look for environmental pesticides, insecticides, other environmental chemicals, along with having a substantially improved detection system for antimicrobials. It's called the KISS test. It's done with kidney. It has a color change. When that happens, then that screening sample goes on for further analysis. Rest assured that here are the KISS versus the old FAST test. This was what was used for a long time. Detection level for penicillin is 30. Tolerance level in kidney for the bovine is 50. The tolerance level for the pig is 0. That has a direct impact on your life. Because getting to 0, or in this case, getting to 30, is more difficult than getting to 400, 800, which was the standard. What has happened? We've had a substantial increase in the number of penicillin residue violations. Not surprising. Most or many of those have been in sows. Not surprising again. It's being used off-label, in some cases extra-label. Now, see, that's why this whole thing circles back together. It's being used off-label or extra-label. It results in a residue. Now, today, the packer can't identify who sent them those animals under most conditions. So, under the FSIS guideline, the packer becomes the violator. And that's not a very good thing. Now, if the packer is buying more animals that have violations, then the inspector also, at that location, can begin to sample more samples than is called for in the statistical sample, which is the overlying issue. So if they suspect an injection site, or they suspect this particular individual is more likely to submit animals, they can, in fact, call for more samples. Boars and stags, surprisingly, have gone down over the last few years. Not surprisingly, market hogs have gone up. Sows have gone up. I will promise you that as the inspectors get more samples in the slaughter plants that are positive, they'll try to figure out where they can get more positives by doing their selective sampling as well. So there are two issues here. The one, the general, and the other is the selected sampling. FSS enforcement, they will notify the inspector in charge about residue violations, and all that's going to do is cause those folks to be more interested in finding more residues. They will also instruct the public health veterinarians to advise the establishments of this development. And one of the things that you may not be familiar with, but the dairy industry certainly is, and the bob veal industry is, there is a repeat violator list. For those of you that want to know what that is, go to FSIS-USDA.gov, Regulations and Policies Enforcement, and you can find a list of producers and or sites that are repeat violators. Being a repeat violator is not a positive business plan. And they're going to add to that list. So the last thing a packing plant wants to be is on the repeat violator list. So expect some pressures to flow back to you folks as a result of that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to do it fairly quickly, we in this industry and pretty much the production animal industry have not had to worry about veterinary or about FDA inspections. If my thoughts are correct and we have increased violations, we are going to see an increase in FDA inspections. So let me just tell you a few things about an FDA inspection, because it'll be the longest day that you've ever spent in your life. I did one with a feed mill, and it was the longest 3 days that I ever spent one day in terms of tension. They have the right to inspect your production facilities. It's in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, because your production facility is a food establishment. You may not think of it as that, but it is. There are two types of inspections: for cause and random. I can count on the fact with the government, with the budget they've got, they are not doing random inspections on farms. They're not just driving by and stopping in to see if you got animals. They're there for a reason, and that reason is going to be violative residues. Okay? I'd tell you to go home and pre-plan. And what that means is if the inspector stops and you got a 15-year-old kid, tell him, I'll call Dad. What you don't want is somebody talking to an inspector and telling them their life's work without understanding what the impact of those words are going to be. Because they will be more than happy to accept that information. So remember, the other thing I'd encourage you to do is remember the inspector has a job to do, and if you make it tough on him, oh my, can he make your life a living hell, he or she. It doesn't have to be a man. They're going to come in and do some sort of an interview. Ask them why they're there so you can narrow the scope of what they need to look at. You're going to have to show records. Those are the production records that's in the PQA GPP4 that you all dutifully say yes to. Well, if these people show up, you're actually going to have to show them to them. And if you don't have them, they're going to ding you. So that's something you need to think about. They'll probably ask for facility tour. They'll want to interview, if you've got staff, they're likely to want to interview the staff to find out if what you're telling them approximates what they think is right. They're going to follow the trail. In other words, if they find a residue and you show them some treatment records and they're a little spotty, they're going to want to follow that trail to see what else they can find. The last thing you want to do is take it as an umbrage. Take it as they don't belong here, they have no business being here. Because when you do that, you interfere with their work, and they're going to get you. So they're going to examine all the drugs on the premise. They're going to look at your injectables and medications. They're going to look at your feed records. They're going to look at the storage. They really are going to look at all the records that they think are pertinent. Here's the GPP4 things you need. The animals treated, the date, and that means the identification of the animals treated, the date, the drug administered, the route, the amount, the person who administered, and this is one that many people don't get into, but you need to have the responsible individual. And I suspect that if the responsible individual is someone other than you, that they probably will want to talk to those people about the instructions you've given them about how you use the product. And then the withdrawal time. Here's my strategies. Be courteous and professional. Be sincere and respectful of their time. Answer the question they ask. Don't give them a long explanation of when the farm was started and how long you've been here and why you do it the way Dad taught you to do and all of that stuff. If they ask you a question, how do you do this? You tell them. During the visit, be aware of their areas of interest. And if it's a sow violation, you might want to, if it's a farrow to finish operation, you might want to steer them towards the gestation and farrowing location, maybe not out into the grow finish. Do that carefully. Remember the inspector has a public health mandate. Their job is to protect the public, and that's the way they come to this task. So anything you do to interfere with that public health mandate is going to irritate them. So you want to be very careful about doing that. They may want copies, or they may want to take the originals, give them copies. But you should show them the original to show them that the copy is a real, true copy of what you have originally. But don't give them the originals. Maintain any duplicate samples of feed or anything else that they take. Maintain some records of all the materials that were taken. And then if they offer, and they generally will offer, read the report that they've written in terms of what they've observed during their visit. If there's something you don't agree with or is unclear, now's the time to get it cleared. If they ask you to sign it, remember that your signature indicates you agree with what's on that report. So if you don't necessarily agree, tell them no. Remain collected and professional, and you'll survive.